Boom.
Boom. Hey guys, welcome back to Black with Endurance. This is our second episode. I'm Lonnie here with my partner in crime, Coach Solomon.
Boom.
As promised, today we are talking about some of the Black athletes in the history of endurance sports, some of which are a little well known and some don't have any recognition or no real records. So this should be really interesting. And we would like to hear your input as well if you know any athletes out there that have done amazing things that didn't really make it to the history books. How you doing today, Coach?
I'm doing great. You know, Christmas is over. How was Christmas for you?
Oh, it was great. I actually got some new toys for the podcast for Christmas, so I'm happy.
So did I. It's always a good thing when our loved ones support our interests here.
Right?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Speaking of interests.
A little thing that interests me that I recently noticed when it comes to endurance sports or cycling, to be more accurate, is that we had the first Black male cyclist in 1896, but we didn't have a Black female pro cyclist until recently, which is just in 2019. And I think that there are a lot of Black people that, cycle and are in that sport. I wonder why that we haven't got any pros or more women pros.
There's that double whammy of, that our Black women face in terms of, racial discrimination or racial prejudice or racial barriers, and then also gender issues as well. So as a male, I wouldn't be the best person to speak on that, but I can tell you that, man, I'm gonna have to dig into that disparity. Yeah. That's huge.
Yeah, because Major Taylor, he in 1896, he became a pro. He rode and stuff, and now you have Aisha that didn't even get into it until 2019. So it just, is there not that many women that are participating at that level? Like,
what is Aisha's last name?
Aisha, I forgot, McGowan.
Aisha McGowan. So we have Aisha McGowan, who's just recently hit the pro team. How many years after Major Taylor?
Over a century.
Wow. Wow.
That's crazy. Sorry.
No, that's you're blowing my mind back. You're blowing my mind back here. I didn't realize that. There's so much to cover. Like, we'll be doing this podcast for the next 20 years. There's so many little nuggets, nuances like that.
Yeah. But I know you've been doing your research and that you found a few people that aren't even in the history books that we don't even know about. So,
well, that's one of the reasons why I'm sitting here just rubbing my head. Like, here we have a Black woman just recently making the pro team in cycling, when there's some documented, well-known history that Black women in particular have been on bikes, avid cyclists since this country started. Let's take it back to 1928, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this is a kind of well documented. I mean, we have pictures. We'll be able to cut some pictures in here. But 1928, 5 Black women from New York. Shout out to New York City, man. New York City, they just produce some of the most toughest and like that.
It's that grit.
It's that grit, right? So 5 Black women out of New York City take it upon themselves to set a challenge, and they ride on bikes 250 miles from New York to Washington, D.C.
Wow.
I'm gonna say that one more time. 250 miles, 1928, from New York to Washington, D.C.
I can't imagine. Like, what in the world was that like without the modern technology, and just what type of equipment did they have to use?
I mean, so like we can get into context, what's going on in 1928, race riots. I'm almost positive Tulsa, the famous Tulsa, Oklahoma race riot was like 1920, 22, 23, somewhere in there. It was
Yeah.
in the 20s. Um, I believe St. Louis, there was a bunch of race riots. So it's not as if everything was cool. You know what I mean? It's not like it was just like, I mean, they are from New York, right? So New York at that time was probably like the Mecca. But
Yeah.
still, for five women to hop on bikes, no GPS, no cell phone, no pager. Most of our young people won't even know what a pager is, right? And I guess the point that I'm making is, if something were to happen, what would be the means of communication, right? So all they would have is themselves, and that was the biggest thing that jumped out to me. So these women came together and said, "Hey, let's challenge ourselves, and let's go out, let's do this." And the data that we have from the article is just a couple articles that are about these women that have been mentioned by people who are historians, who are like doing thesis. All they have was like, these women came together and said, let's go on a ride.
Right.
Let's challenge each other. Now here it is. Definitely. 2020, and even though COVID has shut us down, we got some folks who are like, well, we can't do nothing, right? Can you imagine what those women would be doing today?
Okay. Riding 500 miles.
They would be out. There would be no excuses. But anyway, I digress. So a little bit about these women that we do know. We do know that two of them were into the physical sports. One was a Harlem YWCA instructor. The other one was a sergeant at the School of Physical Training. This was in New York, right? We just know this from a small caption in a newspaper article.
Yeah.
Some other details. On the first day of their ride, they biked 110 miles to Philly. The second day, they biked 40 miles to Delaware. And the third and final day, they biked more than 100 miles, arriving in Washington, D.C. They did some sightseeing in D.C., went to the mall, the National Mall, went to Howard University, and they bounced, and they went back. So that story will forever stick with me. I'll be looking for more information. If anyone's listening and they know about the famous 5 Black women out of New York who took that 250-mile bike ride, hit us up. Let me know.
I want to know their names.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when you see this picture, for all the listeners, when you see the picture of these women, you can tell they ain't playing no games. You can just see it in their face. They're like, I wish somebody would.
Thank you for tuning in to the Black with Endurance minicast on YouTube. For more of this episode and other episodes, please be sure to subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, or wherever you get your podcasts fix. Thank you so much for listening.